years ago, back when dirt was new, I took up archery. I started the SCA because I was at an ethnic festival, and they had a form to fill out. Which of these things are you interested in? And I'm checking almost all the boxes. Which can you teach? And I'm checking about half the boxes. And they're saying, oh, we do archery every Tuesday at Isaac Walton League. I'll lend you my bow. That was Constance. And I started shooting. And even though I couldn't really afford it then, I bought a bow. Master Grant was very kind, and he was willing to do payments, but I made sure I paid him up front. And then over time, I learned how to make arrows, partly because I couldn't afford to buy them. I started with 3 arrows that I had to drive 30 miles to get because nobody in the area had wooden sheds. Anyway, I worked with Master Grant for a long time, and I learned about why he had the standards he had and how the arrow itself, it doesn't make the archer. You can have wonderful arrows and still be a lousy archer. But having good arrows helps you be a better archer, because it's all about cleaning up the variables. If you have a heavy shaft and a light shaft and a shaft with a big warped curve in it, you're going to think no matter what you do, you're a bad archer, because they're all different. And even though you might be doing exactly everything right, they're going to fly all over the place. So part of it is understanding what part the arrow has to play. At first, you might just be buying, the 6 arrows you can get real cheap. And I've done that recently when I was out of arrows, and just say, well, they'll do for now. And if you're teaching a youngster that's going to lose all their arrows, yeah, get them the cheap ones. Or if you get them better ones, fluorescent orange. It might not be period, but you're more likely to find them. Whenever, though, you get into the idea of arrows, you first get into the idea of a bow. And here I'm talking a little bit about what was covered in the youth archery. Without having the bow, you can't choose the arrows. First, you have to understand the concepts. This is somewhat like an English longbow. This is a longbow. It's probably lemon wood. I got this off of a guy who owned a hardware store, and I wish I had his phone number, because I would like to. I met him once after a restaurant visit, and he talked about now that he was retired, he might get back into archery. I thought I'd give it back to him, but I lost the phone number. So a longbow unstrung is relatively straight. There's an odd one called a deflex reflex. It looks like a recurve, but isn't. The definition is whether the string rides along the back later. In the course of everything, I also learned to make my own bow. And that's a challenge. Many, many hours of very hard work. When a bow is made, here we're talking longbow, the back of the bow has to all be one growth ring on the tree. This is Osage orange. See the pretty color? It was the color of a lemon. Osage orange, when fresh cut, is bright yellow, like a lemon. And I'm going, ah! But I found out later, as it ages, it oxidizes. And here we have this color of cherry wood, and a wonderful bow. Now, traditionally, as far as we know, there was not a rest on an English longbow. It was shot off the hand. That, again, it's if you don't have a rest, you're introducing a variable. If you don't have a knock point, you're introducing a variable. Your knock point can be as simple as a different color of thread on your survey. But by first understanding the bow, you know more about what your arrow needs are. A recurve bends back, but when it's bent for use, it's this way. And the string will ride here on this groove. It has more kick. If you want power, go with a recurve. I pull 30 pounds easily. This bow was tillered by me down to 37 pounds, and it shoots exactly the same as my recurve. It's like that arrow is walking to the target, even though I'm putting forth a lot more work. So there's a reason why recurves are often preferred. Let's see. This is a partially done recurve, and I'm bringing this out for a couple of reasons. Can you see the markings here? The different layers here. That's the grain of the wood. Now here you should not see any of that. This would be what's somewhat complicated bow. They have a name for this. I can't remember right now. A lot of them, people like these, the bows that are a bit unique. As long as it's all one grain of the wood, it doesn't matter if it twists or turns. So some people prefer it. I stopped tillering this one when I noticed some cracks occurring, and I'm sort of like, you know, this is not gonna, it's not gonna finish out. So I gave up on it and I said, okay, it's done. But I kept it to demonstrate. This is just to the point where you would start bend testing it and tillering it to strength, but it's a dead bow. Now here, this is a great starter bow. They're hard to kill. It's a cheap fiberglass bow, show up at yard sales, check them for scratches, and then take it to a marshal and have them check for scratches. Check for damage. You know the bow's strength usually by there'll be some sort of decal or logo. Here's one on this one that talks about how many pounds weight it is when drawn to 28 inches. 28 inches, this is the standard for most bows. There are a few that were designed and tested at 26 inches. And if you are talking to somebody who has a very short draw, that's important. So right now we're talking the weight of the bow. My bow is a 30 pounder. Now we have to talk, oh, and it's 30 pounds at 28 inches. What's your draw length? I draw on a regular basis to 27 inches. Maybe on a crazy day, I might draw further or at an odd angle, but 27 is my standard. So in theory, I'm actually drawing and pulling to a lesser poundage than 30. I could have a spine of exactly 30, and there's a little wiggle room in there. It's still safer for me to have 30, 35 pound shafts. And that's talking about, okay, that's talking about the flexibility of the arrow. First, let's talk about draw weight. Okay, we talked about that. And the length of your string depends on the bow. I'm getting back to the form. The length of the string depends on the bow. Now, this bow over here, I kind of gave up shooting. I'm not sure it would pass a test. It's got a nasty gouge here. I had it in the back seat without a cover. And frankly, I don't think it would pass. So I replaced it, even though I prefer shooting it. I'm a marshal. I know I probably would question it, so I don't shoot it. But when I needed a new string on this the first time, I was told, well, the new string should give you a fist meal. or no, a fist meal from the back. It should stand that far up. So I did. And I twanged my nose for a year. The whole summer, I twanged my nose. Finally, I called the maker. I said, how high is it supposed to, is the spring? What is the brace height? That's the term. What's the brace height? They told me, and I got a new string. I don't twang my nose anymore. It's an important thing to note. The standard was a fist meal, but that's not every bow. And that's the standard several hundred years ago. So whatever length your first string is, it's very good to go with that. If you don't know, you start with a fist meal and see how it works out. Thickness of your bowstring. The string that came with that had nine strings. If I am shooting with more threads, nowadays we use Dacron because the commercially produced Dacron is reliably always the same, and it will give you the same results all the time. You're less likely to have a broken string. It's safer. In period, linen or hemp might have been used. Again, yes, you could do that, but the modern materials in this case are safer, and I would err on the factor of safer. Having too thick a string, you're pushing extra weight. When you're pushing that string, you're pushing extra weight. The tillering string I have here, I don't know, it's like 12 or 15 strands. That's robbing strength from my arrow. So you want the right poundage string so you're not wasting energy. And a lot of what affects the flight of the arrow is you. First, the bow is a bird, not a hammer. Okay, that's not, this is the way you should hold your bow. Just enough strength on it that if you let go, it hopefully doesn't fall from your hand. But when you pull back on that string, it'll be pulled up against your hand. You don't need to grip it like it's a hammer. Some archers even have a lanyard around the bow so that they know it's safe to have their hand open. That makes a big difference. When you release, you just open your hand. This is my favorite trick when I'm having a bad day. Well, you're waving at the gallery, okay? Waving at all the audience. It's going to throw off your shot. Go back and touch your ear or stay steady, whatever you have to do. But moving back is good because you're giving it that equal and opposite reaction. Keep the bow hand steady. Don't let it move on you, because until the arrow hits the target, you have a time period in there where you don't know if that arrow has completely cleared the bow. So don't drop the bow. Be sure your knock point is set correctly. Knock point on these fuzzy bits are silencers. They're just bits of wood. The knock point is this little brass thing, for those people who don't already know. In period, they may or may not have had them. They had something called walking the string, totally another subject. This means you're always setting it in the same place on the bowstring as opposed to higher and lower. You want it to be level. And they check that with one of these. Remember that your arrow has the thickness of about 1/4 inch. So when this is placed on the string, you should have about 1/4 inch above center where everything is lying straight to the string and your arrow is right in there. If your arrow appears to be jumping up, you need to move it. If it's diving down, you need to move it because that will affect it. the best thing that ever happened to me, one of the people at Isaac Walton, he stood off to the side where he was completely safe and he watched my arrows fly. And he was able to help me tune that knock point just a little. I forget whether it was up or down, but it made all the difference. That knock point is important. These are things you might not have right the very first day you shoot, but that's okay. You start one place and you watch how the arrows are behaving. You watch what is happening and figure out why. Ask other archers. Now, in my notes, I have something there about stacking. And I'm not sure I can define stacking. Stacking is, as you pull it back, it gets harder and harder to pull. Sometimes it's very noticeably hard at a certain point. Sometimes it's evenly hard all the way back. Compound bows, the ones with the wheels and the pulleys that are not legal SCA, they have a let off. You get it all the way back and all of a sudden, instead of the 50 pounds it took you to pull it back, you're only holding 12. And this is why they can stand there for a full 5 minutes, getting their aim just perfect. We don't have that. And in fact, with a natural wood longbow, the longer you hold that arrow at aim, the less spring there is in the bow. So you don't want to hold it too long. You need to hold it long enough to have your sight, to have it right, and then you need to release as soon as possible. Dry firing, never do it. You might get away with it, especially if it's a modern piece of fiberglass like that gray one I showed you. Those are made for kids. They're very hard to destroy. But you've got a good bow, you spent a couple $100 on it. Don't dry fire. It causes damage to the bow. It might not show up the first time or the second time, but it's putting stresses on the bow because it's designed to have those stresses be taken up partly by forcing that arrow forward. And if it's not forcing that arrow, all that stress goes to the bow itself. Okay, now we get on to aiming. We were talking earlier about teaching little kids. And no matter what you tell them, the little kids think it's a rifle and they want to sight down that arrow. And that's not how it works with an arrow. First, you really don't want that knocking your eye. Second, that arrow is not going to fly entirely straight. And from your point of view, it's not going to be a straight line anyway. That arrow is going to fly in a curve. It'll rise slightly when it comes off the rest. A little bit from the feathers. You might not even see it. It shouldn't look like a porpoise. There might be a slight lift. And then it's going to start to fall, 32 feet per second per second. Now, they talk about crossbows being fast bows. That means it's getting to the target quicker. So it's not falling as much. But it doesn't, they're both falling at the same rate, just less time to get there. You also have the archer's paradox. When that arrow leaves the bow, it's actually bending, and it's bending again and bending again. I'm using a very old arrow to do this, bending again. And as it bends, it's going to do this all the way to the target. If your arrow is too stiff for your bow, it's going to look like this going back. If it's just right, it'll just fly off that bow and it'll be perfect. And for an illustration, I have this. And this is in the materials sent out. I got this off the web. Likewise, if you have too much or too little spine, that initial bending will cause it to go left or right of the target. if you are over or under spined. And that's one of the things you can do. You need to have the spine right for your bow. Over a heavy spine, say you're shooting a 30 pounder, you've got a 45-pound spine, perfectly safe. And it might be if you have several kids in the same family who are shooting various bows and you want them sharing arrows, you're going to go with those 45 pounders. But it's going to do that all the way to the target. And there's going to be some adjustments you have to make and name, but it's safe. If you're buying them for yourself, you want them to be right for your bow. So you find out, and this is a calculation the Fletcher will do for you. He'll find out what your draw weight is. I mean, what your draw length is. He's going to look at the bow, or you're going to tell him, well, it's a 30 pounder. And then he says, well, you draw 27 pounds. You draw 27 inches, 30 pounds. Well, we can go as low as 25, but it's better to put in 5 pounds extra. Okay, 30-pound arrows. Now you have to look at some other factors. What sort of fletches? Now, for a 30-pound arrow, these fletches, I think they're 2.5 inches, 3 inches, 2.5. Oh, perfect. These are the right size for this lightweight of an arrow. The person who wants the big 4-inch fancy fletches, they're adding extra drag. These are also, I believe, helicals. This is from the junk arrow box from years and years ago. The helical, the idea is it's going to spin the arrow. I don't know if that helps a lot. For a 30-pounder, it's not going to help. It might help with a bigger, stronger poundage bow. It's not going to help with my little bitty 30-pounder. Okay, another part of the archer's paradox is you're looking down, the point is there. You're not, it's not a rifle. You're not looking down the shaft. You're looking at the target. You should look at the target. Hold your body, aim. Your wrist should be straight, not like that. I've seen too many little kids do that. And let go. Let's see, fletches, we covered fletches. And there was another thing I wanted to cover. Did I miss that? Probably. Well, let's also talk taking care of your arrows. Okay, let's say you've got some arrows. It's the right, the Fletcher says they're right for your bow. One of the things the Fletcher is looking at when they're making the arrow is they're looking, hopefully, if they're responsible, not so much the arrows that are mass produced in China or whatever, but they're looking at the grain of the shaft. Does the grain of the arrow run the length of the shaft or most of it? Or does it go across the shaft like that? In the tree may have been bent and then they cut straight shafts out of it. Look at how the grain runs in the shafts. At the end of the shaft, you're going to see something like this. Okay, this is looking at the grain of the shaft. This is looking at the end of the shaft. When they measure spine, what they do is they set it so that the grain of the shaft is standing on end like this. And they put a 2-pound weight on it, with it being on points 26 inches apart. And then there's a measurement they use to determine what poundage that shaft is. They're checking the flexibility of the shaft. If a shaft is too flexible, it will break. Okay. I'm not talking about 2 pounds light. I'm talking about, you're shooting a 20-pound shaft on a 40-pound bow. That's dangerous. And as an example, well, think of a book, a paperback book. Which way does it bend more easily? You're measuring it this way, which is the way it's harder to bend. And that's the way your arrow should be shooting too, with this way on your shaft, on your bow. Once in a while, a fletcher will kind of mess that up on occasion. But that way it's being used the same way it was tested. I was looking at fletching spine testers just today on the internet, and there are a number of places that will show you how to make one fairly cheaply, you know, like 10 bucks. If you buy one, they're like 100. I'd go with some of the videos. You need 2 points that are 26 inches apart. You need a 2-pound weight and a scale. Do it yourself. Your shaft should be sealed in some way. This is, I believe, super coat. You need the sealing because if it's moist outside or your shaft gets wet, it's going to gain weight. It's not going to shoot right. You need it sealed against the weather, and it's nice to have it pretty. Traditionally, they would have been tied on. This is glued, and this is glued as 4-fletch because that's what I prefer to shoot. As they were discussing before, with 3-fletch, you have the one cock feather here, and you have the other 2. This is against the bow. Obviously, they would be smushed, but we're not showing them smushed. You have the odd colored feather here. With 4-fletch, it doesn't matter which way they go on, because if the nock will fit, it's the right way up. And that's why I prefer them. I like to do speed shoots. They will both shoot fine. The parabolic cut is what this is called. Pope Young works, that's kind of pointy at the end. I can't tell you which one's best. I'm told parabolic is best, but I haven't tested. Next thing you have to worry about is having your arrows straight. Now for that, I love saving this old piece of junk arrow. This came out of a junk arrow bin that I collected from somebody else. So this arrow could be 20 years old. And it doesn't matter where it's been and how it's been mistreated. It's straight. I love it. I pull it out and I'm saying this is what a straight arrow feels like when you hold it, because it feels different when you hold it and it's a straight arrow. You can also spin them. Because I'm not very good at spinning it in my hand, I like this flat tabletop. That's what it should sound like. I believe I put this one here because it doesn't sound that way. At that point, you know there's a problem. You look up and down the shaft. And you spin it so that you can have, say, a light shining on it, and you can find where the bend is. And you carefully try to tweak it back into position. You have to be careful because you can easily reverse the problem. And if you play with it too often, it'll become a noodle. And it will never hold true afterwards. There are other ways of straightening shafts. Some people prefer buffing one side, pushing the fibers in as a way. There is, I said, there's more than one way. And you want your arrows to be straight. Another way, I showed you rolling it on the table there. Sometimes I've straightened them on the table itself. Don't normally have a table available. That didn't help. And then I will find where the high point is and work it until I get rid of that high point. This is not an arrow I shoot anymore, so I'm going to stop here. This is just one of my make-do spares. So I think that covers why it's important to have the right arrows. When you can match your shafts in spine weight, and better still, in the actual physical weight of the shafts. Many places now will sell you wood or shafts that are matched in weight to a certain amount. Wizard Archery, their standard was 5 grains. The more modern standard, a lot of people feel 10 grains is close enough. 5 grains was the weight of a postage stamp. It makes a difference. At first though, enjoy shooting, try to get them as matched as you can afford, and shoot and try to eliminate all the variables you can. But you will need to first make sure that you're buying arrows that are right for your bow and for you shooting it. And if you loan out your bow, check that person. What is their draw length? Will they overdraw your arrows and stick themselves in the hand? If your arrow is way too long for them, that's safe. And they may well think they're wonderful. But it is important that you understand why the arrows have to match the bow. Anybody have anything they want to say on the subject? We've got some great archers out there. We've got a whole bunch of foresters.
Eve, do you want to explain a little more about why the grain direction is important to be having the strong backside facing horizontally instead of vertically in relation to how the arrow loads up when you release it?
Let me get a visual aid. I had one ready and didn't bring it to the table. But I have here a book. Okay, if I try to bend this book, it bends pretty easy, doesn't it? I can't bend it this way. It won't bend. I can try real hard. It won't bend. It is stronger one way than another. Okay, and that's why the direction of the grain is very important. What I have people look for is the cathedrals. These are the cathedrals, and these are usually visible on the shaft of the arrow. This one has a few cathedrals that are visible. Not a good example. Here we go. There's some. I don't know if this will show up on screen or not. It's awfully small detail. No, it's not showing up. But you sometimes see little formations like this. And that is the side showing you which direction the grain is. So this is the cut side and this is the other way around. You want this to be like this on your bow, but on a spine tester, it will be like this because that's what you're testing. And this is how it will be in practice because that's how it's used. That's a very good point.
Well,
anybody else?
Well, if you go a little
Yes.
deeper into that, what's actually happening when if you can go on search and actually see a super slow-mo of a shot, what actually happens is surprising amount of bend. If you look at, say, a 35, 40-pound shot, when you release it, you'll get an S curve bending into the shaft, not just a single bend, it's actually a double bend that is maybe that much deflection. It's shocking how much deflection there, or in that way. And so what's happening is the arrow or bolt is flexing as it's leaving the release, and then it stabilizes out, preferably before you hit the target. So the strength of the shaft is enough to let it bend and flex as it's relieving, stabilize itself and get into a pure ballistic arrow flight without
Right.
flexing itself to one side or another. So what you see when you're
Right.
overshafted, undershafted, is you have an impact point moving from right to left because the curvature,
Yeah.
that snake that's coming out of your bow, is snaking and twisting and stabilizing, hopefully, and hitting the spot you're at. If you're overspined or underspined, your point of impact will be right or left of where you're aiming. And that's because of that dynamic effect of the arrow flexing and then stabilizing as it's heading downrange.
Yeah, when you see a video online, it's very clear that the arrow itself does flex. And that's why an underspined arrow can be very dangerous because it can break right in your face. And I like my eyes. A lot of medieval depictions of archers would have one eye and an eye patch. And I don't think it was so they could shoot better. We do need to understand it needs to be able to do that flex, but not too much flex.
We have one
So
event
thank you.
out here
Yes.
on Tier where there's a flight shoot. So it's one arrow as far as you can shoot it. So of course, people are trying to tune their arrow down to as light as possible, as aerodynamic as possible. And we had, I think it was 2 years ago, we had a couple, the guy is a bowyer, so he makes his own bows, makes his own arrows. And literally as they loosed, the arrows exploded because he had gotten them down too far. And so the force of the string just shattered the arrows right off the bow.
Yeah, Master Grant had me make a demo arrow, and he told me ahead of time, you know, it's not going to last. And it wasn't that it broke. He applied some modern engineering and had me first barrel taper it, and then it was an airfoil shape. So you shot it initially into the air and into the wind by preference, so up. And it would start to fall, it would stall, and then as it gained speed, the airfoil would cause it to lift. And then it would stall, and then it would fall, and then it would stall. And you'd see it, you'd get maybe 2 shots before you couldn't find it again. It had a 70-pound, you know, the lightest possible target point on it. And I don't even know if we put any, I don't remember whether we put any fletches on it at all. It flew, but even though it was fluorescent orange, we never did find it after the second shot. So that would be an interesting thing to try, but it's a lot, you know, we started with a like 11/32 shaft and then barrel tapered it by hand. It was kind of interesting. Be interesting to see how that rates at that other shoot.
Yeah, there's a long range flight shoot early morning, kind of midweek at Penzic, where we've got 300 plus yards available. And I forget his name. He's the Khan of the Dark Horde who wins that every year. He is the master at that. And he will make these little toothpicks that are barrel tapered where they're, you know, they're full length in or they're full width in the middle where you need the strongest flex, but they taper down to next to nothing. He's got these little 2-inch parchment fletches and nothing of a tip on it. And 2 years ago, he got 310 yards or so shooting out of 55. He shoots a version of a, you know, kind of a Chinese recurve, Asian recurve, Mongol recurve style. And so you're shooting at 45 degrees, of course, and was getting out 310, 315 yards with these little toothpicks. But he knows what he's doing and is able to find the right stock and do the appropriate barrel tapering so it doesn't create that safety issue. But he's been the master.
That would be Naran.
Yep. Yeah, I got close. So using my long range crossbow and a little cut down bolt, I got like 290 yards with mine, but he still beat me with the hand bow on that one just because he's really focusing on the ammunition.
might be worth recreating that arrow again. I think I have some thicker stock around here somewhere, just to see how it would compare.
One thing about aligning the grain of the arrow,
Mhm.
when you look at the butt of the arrow before you taper it and put a knock on it, you want
Yeah.
those lines that come across in that very nice picture you had showed the end of the arrow, and you want those to go across the string, not parallel
Yes.
to it,
Right.
because I
Right.
have seen not just with crossbows, but also, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
In that picture, you want the string to be vertical. With a crossbow,
Right.
you would want it to
This
be.
is how it would be testing. This is how it would be shot. And it's, I wasn't sure how best to make the picture so that it would be, maybe I should have made it so it would rotate. So that the idea.
That picture is excellent, Eve. My point is that once upon a time, I did not get the grain oriented properly in a batch of bolts, and start
Mhm.
right off the get go. They started splitting from the back
Oh,
when I shot them.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I have seen that happen with hand bows too. So you have to be
Mhm.
sure that that's oriented properly. Otherwise, it's really a waste of time.
Yeah. On crossbows bolts, I've seen it, although it tears up the bow. So, like I said, I've seen it. I'm not recommending it. There was something like it was the end of a shell casing or something that Fritz Bear would put on the end of a metal end that he would put on the end of his crossbow bolts, help them last longer. But I'm not sure it was a good idea because then it started, the metal of the backing would catch on the bow, the crossbow itself, and it add to the wear there. So,
Yeah,
Yeah,
metal caps are allowed, but I haven't seen anyone use them.
yeah, I don't know if they're a good
They are
idea.
allowed. Forrester Eamon McGowan, who is
Mhm.
the one of the Top Gun crossbow shooters as well, so he's not here today. He has his bolts made where they put on a regular knock to fletch them, and then they cut it off,
Mhm.
so there's just a ring of plastic left around the butt of the bolt, and those work real well for him. Does a lot of the same things as what Syrian was talking about earlier this morning with his style of cut down knocks.
Mhm.
The
Yeah,
biggest
I can see how that would help find it.
Yeah, well, the bigger concern on the metal knocks is that friction thing. You know, a smooth metal surface has no way to be able to bind uh, to the string during the instant of release. So you have a better chance of the string sliding up or sliding under the bolt and creating a misfire. That friction, point-to-point contact, is really crucial in holding the shot onto the crossbow, because the only thing that's holding it is that friction. You don't have the forks to be able to retain it.
And so the metal end could potentially even be dangerous.
Yes. Yep. I mean, mostly it just creates a misfire, because if you string skip, what happens is you make this big noise and the bolt just goes 5 yards downfield and sits there right in front of you laughing at you. So it's not especially dangerous. It's not good for your score, and it's certainly disconcerting when it happens. but that's really whether it's just a bare wood end or that reinforced wood end, or horn insert or whatever, that instant of contact, that's what drives the whole thing, is that little teeny area between your string and your
Yeah.
projectile. Everything drives off of that.
And because there's no actual knock, no way to create a knock that would work well on the crossbow that I can think of. They would have thought of it long ago if there was. You have to work within that situation.